So I finally got around to watching Snow White. Was it any good? How many butter pumps did it get? Let's find out.
My baby likes butter
Hello, my beautiful butter babies. So let's talk about Snow White, the Disney live-action remake that came out at the beginning of spring. If you look at my previous videos reacting to the trailers of this movie, I was gung-ho about giving it a chance. It was shot beautifully. It was bright and colorful and looked like what a live-action Disney princess movie should look like. I remember saying over and over again, I'm going to give it a chance. I'm going to give it a chance. I'm going to give it a chance. But something happened between the last trailer reaction I did and the premiere. I lost interest. I stayed home and skipped the movie on Snow White's premiere weekend. Then the next weekend came and I chose to stay home as well. Then the next weekend. And the next. And before I knew it, Snow White had made its debut on Disney+. Now, I really want to make it clear here that during its theatrical run, it's not that I was actively avoiding it or trying to prove some stupid go woke, go broke kind of a point. I just had very little interest. The reviews not being stellar, something, by the way, I completely expected, did little to stoke my interest in the film. Every weekend I could go see it, I thought, meh, and I skipped it. But then it hit Disney Plus at no extra charge, and I thought, okay, let's invest 2 hours or so and see what we think of this movie. In a word, unnecessary. 100% unnecessary. There are certain pieces of art that are of their time and should be left there. Only because updating them for modern audiences forces the writers to change the core values of the art. Once those core values are changed, it changes the entire piece of art into something else, into something it was never meant to be. So let's look at a couple of the core values of the original Snow White. In the original 1937 animated movie, the very first time we see Snow White, she's already in rags and is a scullery maid. Her parents are already dead and the wicked stepmother, Evil Queen, is already on the throne. Our very first introduction to her is her singing about wishing for love to come her way. Then as she's singing into the wishing well, her handsome prince comes by and sings to her. So already the main core value in this movie is that her life is horrible and she needs a knight in shining armor to come and not only rescue her, but to love her and carry her off to her happily ever after. And for the next hour and a half in the movie, variations on that trope, of men saving the helpless woman in the woods is repeated over and over again. The huntsman, who was supposed to kill her, saves her instead. The dwarves swear to protect her. She sings arguably the most famous song of the entire movie, Someday My Prince Will Come, which again is all about a handsome prince coming to carry her away to his castle where they'll be happy forevermore. The dwarves race off to save Snow White, but in the end do not, but they do end up killing the evil queen. Again, tropes of a helpless woman lost in the woods and only men can save her. And in the end, a man does save her by giving her love's first kiss. That is the main core value of the movie as presented in 1937. Be a helpless woman and eventually a knight in shining armor will come and rescue you and take you away where you'll live happily ever after. And then there's the issue of the dwarves. You know, I said it before and I will say it again. As far as this movie is concerned, Peter Dinklage was right. To have little people play these roles would be a disservice to little people everywhere. because in the 1937 movie, it leaned heavily into a lot of unfortunate stereotypes and what we generally thought of little people at the time. Yes, Peter gets a lot of maybe deserved shit for opening doors for little people in front of the camera, only to close those doors right behind him as he walks through them. Yes, 7 people almost lost out on jobs because of him, more on the 7 bandits later, but when I think of the backlash the movie would have received and they would have received as actors, it's for the best they went back and CGI'd the crap out of those dwarves. But the problem is, even though animating the dwarves was absolutely the right thing to do, they had to go and make the dwarves palatable to 2025 audiences. As I was writing this review, I decided to go back and watch the original movie on Disney+. I gotta tell you, I was smiling ear to ear anytime the 7 dwarves were graced my screen. I was absolutely charmed by them. They made me laugh more than a few times and they made my heart happy. Yes, they were all silly and all over the top, but that's exactly what was needed in the 1937 movie and what made them so endearing. But at the same time, an argument can be made, and I'm sure probably was made in a boardroom somewhere at Disney Studios, that all those things that made them silly and over the top could be construed as problematic in 2025, which meant taking a core value, laughter and silliness, out of the movie. And as an aside, based on what I've said so far, you would think the 1937 movie was prime for cancellation. I couldn't disagree with that assessment more. It's just when you look at it critically from a 2025 lens, a lot of it is antiquated, or at the very least lacking some much needed nuance and shading that in 1937 Walt Disney and Company didn't have the tools to tackle. Knowing this, we should not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs was and is a masterpiece of a movie. Groundbreaking for its time. So amazing, in fact, that it won an Oscar at the 11th Annual Academy Awards in 1939. And yet, for all its critical praise and accolades, we can't forget those problematic in 2025 core values that made Snow White what it was. To take those out of the story to make it more palatable to modern audiences is to take out the very things that make Snow White, Snow White. To take those main core values out is to basically gut the movie and build something else in its place. And that's exactly what they did. So now let's look at the main core value of the 2025 Snow White. Its main core value is fairness, and by fairness, I'm not talking about how pretty a person is.
Hello, gorgeous!
Fairness in the 2025 version of Snow White is how fair you treat other people. Now that's an interesting twist on the word fairness as we know it from the 1937 movie. And it could have worked. The only problem is somebody forgot this was a fairy tale. A Disney fairy tale. Say what you will about the man, but there was a lightness and a sense of joy in everything Walt Disney touched. Even though there was generally a moral or a lesson to be learned or a message to be understood by the end of the animated short or movie, it was never dealt with a heavy hand. You were never beaten over the head with it or preached to by it. The lesson or moral or message was always wrapped up in a fair bit of lightness, laughter, and joy. And that's what this movie is missing. There was none of the lightness, laughter, and joy that I've been talking about in this movie. They tried it with a new song they gave to Gal Gadot, more on her and all the rest of the cast in a moment, but it fell flat. They had a grand opportunity to do it with one of my favorite songs from the original film, the Silly Song. The Silly Song, if you don't remember it, is a song the dwarves entertained Snow with after dining or dinner on their first night together. It is such a fun song, and the dwarves and Snow look to be having such a great time. But they cut it after only a few seconds to insert a wholly unnecessary love song between Snow and Prince Charming, who is neither a prince nor charming, but more on that later. In the original film, we had almost 5 minutes of them dancing, singing, and just being silly. It was so much fun, and 2025 Snow White desperately needed fun. They worked so hard to make it grounded and palatable film for 2025, they completely forgot the fun. We're about to get into some really light spoilers here, so if you haven't seen the movie yet and don't want to be lightly spoiled, I encourage you to stop right here, go watch the movie, and then come right back. As I said, they took the notion of fairness and turned it on its head. While the Evil Queen was still all about looks and vanity, Snow White would go out of her way to be good to her people, even though she'd been reduced to a scullery maid. In particular, she's kind to a young man who is stealing food from the castle because he's hungry. This man is a new character named Jonathan. He's a stand-in for Prince Charming, but in this movie, he's a bandit. So when on one fateful day, the queen asks the mirror, "Who's the fairest one of all?" the mirror says Snow White, not because she was prettier than the queen,
Hello, gorgeous.
but because she was nicer than the queen. The queen, of course, was furious that someone would be quote-unquote fairer than her, so she sends a huntsman out to kill Snow while he and Snow went on an apple-picking excursion. But the huntsman can't do it. He tells her to run into the magical forest and never come back. She does so and eventually comes across the dwarves' cottage. That evening, she meets the dwarves, and in time, she runs into Jonathan again in the woods alongside his 7 bandits. Eventually, Snow does bite into the queen's poisoned apple, and Jonathan wakes her up with true love's kiss. But that's not the end of the movie. Snow, Jonathan, the 7 bandits, and the 7 dwarves decide to face the queen in battle and bring an end to her once and for all. And defeat her they do. Snow White once again takes her rightful place on the throne to rule the people of her kingdom in kindness and fairness. And they lived happily ever after. So the moral of the story is to be nice and kind and fair to people. Fantastic moral. Now let's wrap that moral up in a Disney-fied fairy tale that's light and joyful. Not so much. For some reason, lightness and joy have absolutely no place in a modern-day fairy tale, which is sad because we could use a lot more lightness and joy nowadays. The heaviness that accompanied this movie would have fit in nicely if this was the original Brothers Grimm version, but this is a Disney-fied fairy tale, and the heaviness that covers this movie like a dark cloud makes it a somewhat bummer of a movie. So what about the cast? Honestly, the cast does its best with what they were given, with Rachel Zegler being the standout amongst them all. She absolutely shines in this movie. Musical theater is really her wheelhouse. Whenever she's on screen belting out a tune, you're drawn in and invested. She has an agency about her that the original Snow White was never allowed to have. You really believe her when she's trying to do the right thing for her people, and you root for her to succeed. She's absolutely wonderful as an updated Snow White. The rest of the cast is honestly mostly interchangeable, especially Andrew Burnap as our Prince Charming stand-in, Jonathan. What I will say is that in the 1937 original, there was no one more bland and more boring than Prince Charming. There was absolutely nothing to him at all. He was a one-dimensional character in a two-dimensional film. The same thing can be said about Andrew Burnap as Jonathan. There was no chemistry between him and Rachel, but then again, there was no chemistry between Snow and Charming in the first movie. So I guess they kept that part true to the original, and I don't blame Andrew Burnap for this at all. Again, I think he did the best he could with what he had. I would like to see him in a movie that shows off his true talents. Then there were the Seven Bandits. Rumors abound that the Seven Bandits in this movie were supposed to be the updated for 2025 Seven Dwarves. But then somehow it was leaked that that was the plan, and there was huge backlash from the internet and social media. So a change was made to make the dwarves CGI and make the bandits part of Jonathan's group. Again, these are all rumors except for the online backlash, which is very much true, but I believe the rumors to be true. Either way, much like Jonathan, there was absolutely nothing to them. They were bland and boring and did nothing to set themselves apart or make themselves special. Now, I believe the reason behind that is they had to scramble during the research, to figure out what to do with them, since the public demanded the Seven Dwarves. This is what they came up with, and it's as tacked on and as unnecessary as it sounds. Speaking of the dwarves, I actually really enjoyed the voice actors behind the dwarves. Yes, they even gave Dopey a voice, which again, totally unnecessary. Why they couldn't just leave him as a dopey guy that made other people laugh and never talked himself is absolutely beyond me. But he finds his voice for the final act of the movie, and you find out in the end he's been the narrator of the story the whole time. All of that aside, the rest of the voice actors were wonderful in their respective roles. Of course, they were all updated and washed clean of their silliness and joy, but they still made each character their own, and most importantly, believable as their respective little person. Now let's talk about my Amazonian queen forever, Miss Gal Gadot. I absolutely hate that she's getting the reputation of not being able to act. That's simply not true. She can act. If she couldn't, she wouldn't have been able to pull off Wonder Woman multiple times across multiple movies. Is she the best actress out there? No, of course not. But to say she can't act at all is so wrong. She can. And let me tell you something. She is trying her best as the evil queen. She is acting her little heart out. The only problem is, it didn't work. In order for most Disney villains to work, they have to have a little bit of camp in this. From Cruella to Scar to Ursula to Prince John, they all have been deliciously evil and deliciously camp. The Evil Queen is one of those characters because her core value is beauty and being the most beautiful in all the land. Well, we all know beauty is skin deep, and chasing after beauty at all costs is something that is ripe for camp. Only thing is, I don't think Gal has it in her to camp it up. She doesn't have it in her to just let her inhibitions and reservations go and chew up all the scenery. She certainly gives it the old Themyscira try in the one musical number she's given, but because she doesn't ham it up and make a full meal out of it, the song eventually ends up falling flat. Gal is not the worst thing to happen to this movie, but she's not the best thing either. She gave it her all, but in the end, I believe she was just really miscast. So how many butter pumps am I going to give Snow White? 2. That's right, 2 butter pumps. It is gorgeously shot. It really does look like a Disney princess cartoon come to life. And Rachel Ziegler, her performance as Snow White was radiant. But those two things together do not equal an endorsement or recommendation. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs was an amazing and groundbreaking movie in 1937. And in 1937 is where it should have stayed. 2 butter pumps. So now I turn it over to you, my beautiful butter babies. Have you seen Snow White? If so, what did you think? How many butter pumps would you give it? Sound off down below. I want to hear all about it. Thank you so much for watching, commenting, liking, and subscribing, my beautiful butter babies. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.